Hello everyone, welcome to Moments with MindLeaps this Friday. Greeting you from New York City. This is Rebecca. I'm the Executive Director and founder of MindLeaps. And every Friday we have the chance to gather on this program, Moments with MindLeaps, to speak with people around the world who are using creativity, research, and ideas of bringing communities together to see the social justice changes that we're thinking about all the way around the world. I'm so thrilled that today Jessie Hawks will be joining us. Jessie is a second edition guest on Moments with MindLeaps. Jessie is actually the USA Program Director of MindLeaps. Hi, Jessie.
I thought Instagram usually goes frontwards.
Jessie, I was just starting to introduce you to our guests today. This is very special because this is actually the second time ever, yes, I think ever, Moments with MindLeaps has had the same guest back on our program. And that is because since the last time I had the chance to talk to you, Jessie, you've moved from your previous roles onto the MindLeaps team full-time as the USA Program Director. And we're going to hear all about what that means. But before we had the good fortune of inviting you into our family, Jessie and I knew each other from the work he led with the Global Youth Connect organization as Executive Director, leading trips for youth around human rights around the world. That extended previously to living in Rwanda and founding an organization called RAPSIDA. And then sometime in his free time, also graduating from Harvard and working with global kids to bring other students around the world to America. So many things to talk about today, but we're going to focus a little bit more on the US. Jessie, thank you for being with us.
It is my absolute pleasure. I feel like I've seen you somewhere this week, Rebecca.
And one of the many places we've seen each other has been at our New York City program for MindLeaps.
Indeed. Yes, indeed. Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to be here, and we've just basically almost wrapped the program, our first pilot program. So I'm really excited to talk to you about that and, social emotional learning and the arts in the United States today. I'm learning a lot as I go and really enjoying it.
And I know that one of the conversations that was kind of the impetus for much of what's transpired since then was you and I sitting at Bryant Park here in New York City and thinking about, like, what is social emotional learning to you and me in the middle of the pandemic? For those of our friends who know New York City or live in New York City, it's just a very surreal experience to see the city that never goes to sleep go absolutely silent. And I know both of us were here during the middle of the pandemic. And then sometime within that, Jessie, you found yourself in the classroom environment during the pandemic. Share with us a little bit about kind of what all of this beginning of the COVID world meant to you and your social emotional learning and your steps working with youth.
Yeah. Well, actually, at the beginning of the pandemic, I actually went to Maine and was on a lake in Maine for about 5 months. Talk about isolation. But, it was a beautiful experience, nice to be with nature. And, in the end, I was happy to help New York minimize the number of people who might be going to the hospital. But when I came back in August of 2020, I've been a substitute teacher in the schools in New York City. Had the great fortune of working with a number of wonderful schools like the James Baldwin School in the Chelsea area. And when I came back to New York, I took a full-time substitute position, essentially, with the Renaissance School of the Arts in East Harlem. It's a public middle school, also attached to a primary school. And I was lucky enough, I had no idea what was going to happen, but I was lucky enough to get a position in the visual arts room. And the teacher was at home. She had she had a condition that meant that she had to stay home. And I think most people will be aware that we had youth who were both hybrid, who were at home being taught by her, but also youth in the classroom being taught by her.
Yeah.
So I was a substitute, and I was basically in the classroom helping the children, learning about art as I went, helping the kids to be seen by her, bringing the laptop around and showing her face to the children and having her see the work and them talking to her. It was an amazing experience. They got a lot of great work done despite the obstacles. I even had a chance to do some work myself. I guess I'll show this right now. This was one of my self-portraits.
Jesse, it looks just like you.
Yeah. Someone came over and they said, that looks political. I said, hey, it's contour line drawing, which is a very kind of freeing improvisational technique that is like basically the groundwork for great artists to be able to do that, to look at something and then draw without looking at the page. So in any way, that experience of working in the schools was difficult, of course, but it was also very eye-opening. I, of course, love to get to interact with the children and to support them during this very difficult time. And to support teachers during this very difficult time. I could hardly imagine what it was like for that teacher to be at home for months and a year on end and not be with her students, not be face-to-face. And I know teachers and students all over the country were dealing with that, but New York was special because we went back to school. And so I was also able to understand a little bit more about the challenges that were facing the children at home, people coming from under-resourced communities, unable to access the internet, making the class very difficult for them to teach and to learn. And even the students in the school itself, their attendance was irregular, and that was also partly due to the fact that there were, pandemic scares, there was testing all the time. It was a very difficult time in terms of social emotional learning. I started making bread to try to really get to bring myself back into reality, things like that. But I don't mean to make light of it. Basically, it's a period of time where I think school teachers across the country will say that it was like a lost 2 years, where children who were in 4th grade in 2019, 2020 came back 2 years later, perhaps still in 4th grade, essentially, even though they were in 6th grade. So, with the kind of teamwork skills or ability to relate to peers and to teachers. So it was a very, very intense period, but also, a period that I was happy to be able to be in the school.
And I mean, as you know so well, I mean, the pandemic really forced us as MindLeaps to look at like where is our place in the world of education. And so many of our programs internationally that you know so well really focus on how to take kids who are out of school and get them in school and then they succeed. But with the pandemic, many of us as Americans were looking at our own country thinking, how do we go just from what you were saying, from kind of 2 years of lost education to ramp up all of that social emotional learning and the hard skills that have been compromised during this time. And that was like one of the main forces that put us together and had us talking about whether or not MindLeaps should really get serious about starting a program in New York City, or at that point we were just thinking about the US in general. And we kind of threw the gauntlet down to you, is like, Jesse, what do you think MindLeaps could do in the US? And maybe you could share with us kind of how you started to like pick apart that puzzle for us.
Yeah, well, it was an honor to come on board and try to see where the MindLeaps model, which had been developed overseas and verified and scientifically researched and was having demonstrable change in the lives of the children, and putting them on a path towards self-reliance and resilience, and to see like where was that going to start in the United States. I mean, we wanted to run a pilot program to basically, to test how it works. And it could have been with any particular number of communities who are having particular challenges in this day and age, and also historically. So immigrant communities, we were looking at youth who were immigrants to the United States. We also we're looking at shelter system for women and children affected by homelessness. We weren't exactly sure which organization would be available for this program at this point in time. I mean, back in 2022, in the fall, if everybody can remember, I mean, we were still on tenterhooks about like whether we were going to have another variant. People were just getting over the Delta variant, and then there was the scare of the Omicron variant. There was a lot of capacity issues, I would say, at the local level. So we met with like 20, 30 organizations on Zoom. We talked to them about the programs, and just had such a wealth of ideas about how it could happen. And it happened with one of those ideas.
And we're so excited to dig a little bit deeper into this beautiful partnership that's evolving with Children of Promise. And I remember very much in these conversations, and I think, Jesse, I mean, you and I often turn to each other these days and be like, gosh, like it's so much more than what we knew then. I think even understanding how Black and Brown communities are affected by racial injustices, historical injustices, institutional injustices, and then aggravated by the pandemic is like a huge kind of awakening for many of us who are white and come from privileged backgrounds. And I think, it was the pandemic for many of us where we kind of woke up to these issues. But really, I mean, these issues have been here for hundreds and hundreds of years. But it was also this adjustment process and this learning and this continual journey that I think many of us are going on to understand what is the right place for an organization like MindLeaps or people like you and me to really try to advance these communities in the right way. And I know you've been a huge part of my learning journey around that as well.
Well, and to be sure, the partner organizations that have been working on serving these historically marginalized, institutionally oppressed communities in the United States have been doing this work for years.
Yeah.
And the social justice movements during the pandemic time. One person described it as like the woke community getting more woke about the issues in the wake of George Floyd and many other tragic deaths. That organizations have been working on these issues for many, many years, and we knew that our model must be tested essentially in concert with organizations like that, because we can't just come in and have all the answers.
Yeah.
We have a model that we think will create demonstrable change that can then be translated into the work that is already going on and the understanding that is already there at the community level. So we were very, very excited to be able to partner with Children of Promise NYC, which serves children who are system impacted, who have parents who are incarcerated, or a parent who is incarcerated. And they've been around for, I believe, about 13 years. They have a campus in Brooklyn and in the Bronx, and we were able to start working with the 8- and 9-year-old children in January of this year,
Yeah.
through basically this week, last week, to basically 3 hours a week. We were there for like 7 hours. We're working with the kids about 3 hours a week. And so we were blessed to work with this organization, Children of Promise, given their the robust nature, the holistic nature of their programming. They have a co-located mental health clinic, so they have staff on hand who are working with children daily, counteracting the stigma of having a parent who is in the prison system or is system impacted. That is such an important element, and I know that the children take great pride in the work that Children of Promise is doing with them, and we see that on the dance floor. We see that like when we want them to like shout out something, good. We talk about Mental Health Awareness Month. They've heard of that from Children of Promise, and they're working with them, and you can see that the stigma is being counteracted, which is beautiful for a MindLeaps program to be able to start with an organization with such a reach. So that has been a particularly important element, that mental health component.
It definitely, I think, that's kind of like front and center, and having these changes in the social emotional learning level that you can see in terms of movement and you can feel, but then really supported by that clinical work right on site. I think one of the other things that always strikes me about these wonderful youth at Children of Promise is how adept they are with movement and how physical they are as young students. I remember one of the big questions that was at the front of our minds at MindLeaps when we wanted to test this model in the United States is like, will dance actually like be interesting to kids. And I mean, I know that you've kind of seen this from the beginning until the end of our first cohort, Jesse, but one of the things that's really stood out for me is that there's a lot of interest and energy in these youth with movement, whether or not it's dance that's the actual hook or more just like a release of physical energy. I think the jury is still out for me on that, you know, definition or that construct, but I've been so pleased to see these kids respond so physically in these spaces that we're creating with Children of Promise.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, you know, when we went to Children of Promise initially, we went to do some tutoring work to get to know the 8 and 9-year-old scholars in their cohort. And, you know, we didn't really make a big deal about it, but we did say, you know, we're going to come back and do a dance program with you. And what's interesting about the MindLeaps program is that it is quite different than what any child in the United States would think is a dance program. You know, I'm going to come in, I'm going to learn how to do my tendus, and I'm going to learn the pas de deux, and like that's what I'm going to do in this class. It's going to be ballet or it's going to be jazz. And so the MindLeaps class is very different. I mean, it starts off with an aerobic, fun, intensive warm-up that includes games, and all of these are connected to the idea of advancing 7 key social emotional learning skills. There's a very specific diagonal section that comes close to like a dance class, but it's still not exactly dance class. And then there's choreography at the end. So what we went up against in this with the 8 and 9-year-old children is that this wasn't a dance class that they were expecting. And that is also something that they were willing to tell us, which was great, because the open communication is so important, especially with that age group, because they're going to tell you what is on their mind. And so we were able to adjust our program. We were able to add things like more fun choreography at the beginning of class or in the middle of the warm-up, and then go back to the warm-up, which is going to allow our dance trainers to really cultivate and observe changes in the social emotional learning skills. Whereas sometimes a fun choreography exercise is not going to do that, but it is going to engage the energy of the children. So in the United States context, we have been going up against this idea of, you know, personal agency and the idea of the self being very important, and not always, you know, the top-down method of teaching, for example. It's in MindLeaps, we don't necessarily teach with that kind of top-down level, and so the kind of expression of the children comes out even more, and so that's what we've been, you know, sort of going up against and learning how to cultivate.
Yeah, I love those examples, and I think, you know, just how you speak about how it's so wonderful to work with children everywhere in the world because they're so honest and they just tell you what they're thinking, and that helps us to do the program modifications much quicker. I think another part of this is, as you've alluded to, is the relationship with Children of Promise has also helped us. I mean, we're very fortunate to be partnering with an organization that will tell us when they think MindLeaps is doing work well, that will tell us when they think we're missing things and when we have deficiencies or blind spots and things we need to address. And then, I mean, you see the programs grow overseas too, Jesse. I mean, that's always been like a key thing that makes MindLeaps work in the end and makes MindLeaps owned by the partner organization or by the trainers, is because they've actually been a part in making those adaptations. So it's really serving the needs of that particular community. And I know another part of that, Jesse, has been you working with the MindLeaps trainers and having an opportunity to meet new trainers, work with old trainers that you've also met in the past. Maybe some of those memories. I mean, memories insofar as it's the first cohort, but not memories insofar as there won't be a second cohort.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we started the program, we didn't know which organization or when it was going to happen. We were so lucky that Caitlin Casson and Sadia Ramos, who are certified MindLeaps trainers who have gone through rigorous training with MindLeaps and who have worked overseas with MindLeaps in Rwanda, in Guinea, that they were available to start this program with us and with you, Rebecca, as one of the trainers. You have been indispensable, of course. And we also were very lucky to have a male trainer join us, Kevin Zambrano, who is a fantastic young dancer who was in West Side Story just prior to the pandemic on Broadway. And so Kevin has brought just immense energy to the program. As I mentioned, the fun choreography. It is so crucial that we have a male or male identifying trainer on the team. And so he has just been able to lead the children in ways that, say, the all-female staff were not able to. And I would say that, like, you know, in terms of the other staff, like, Sadia brings like this quality of looking at every individual child and creating a spreadsheet afterwards in the meeting that goes from 6 to 7, but usually goes to 7:30, about what particular social emotional learning skill is that particular child having challenge with. And we can go into the data and we can look at the data on that, right? Because we're collecting that, but we're also just using our instincts. And so her attention to each child was really, really beautiful to watch. And then Caitlin has the most expertise of anybody on the team besides yourself in terms of the curriculum, the MindLeaps curriculum. So she just brought so many ideas and just like so much get up and go with regards to how are we going to adjust here? Yeah. What could we try over here? So we tried a lot of different things during this program, and the trainers were really like open to doing it. Which was wonderful. It's
such a collaborative environment. I mean, I've had the chance to work on several MindLeaps teams, but this team really was faced with a lot of new information, different environments, different experiences between us and the youth. It's really kind of a fascinating process to see that teamwork and that team building on the trainer side. And just of course, we can't be remiss in the fact that, of course, in 2 days, on Monday, we're starting our June Train the Trainers here in New York City, which is the program that creates people like Sadia and Caitlin from the beginning. And we're excited to see what this new group of trainers will experience as we've also learned a lot in the last year. Yes, absolutely.
And just on that point of the training team, I just wanted to say that, you know, we recognize that we are serving an organization that serves children who are Black and brown and who are system impacted, coming from a very specific community. And our training team doesn't reflect the reality on the ground there in the community. And that's something that we had to talk a lot about. And it's something that we want to, I can say correct, but also to just to improve. Because it's so important for the children to have role models that come from within the communities and that representation matters. So, you know, and I can go into as I said before, we didn't know exactly which community we'd be working with and all of that in the United States. So we're very cognizant of that. And at the same time, we've had a nice 6-month period with which to create relationships with the children and with the team there at Children of Promise. And so, whereas in MindLeaps program, sometimes it's just like a 12-week program, very intensive, 2 hours, 3 days a week. This one was basically elongated out to 6 months. So, like, I feel like we've really been able to be in good communication and work through challenges with each other, with the good communication with the partner.
Absolutely, and I know a lot of that learning and the learning that's continuing, the representation changes and shifts that are really now at the forefront of MindLeaps' next level of strategizing and improving. That's also at the kind of the forefront of where does the program go now. So Jesse, as USA Program Director, can you imagine what's next in the plan, whether or not that's in 3 months or 1 year or?
Sure. Well, actually, next month, we are going to have our second pilot project with Children of Promise, and we're going to be working in the Bronx, at the campus in the Bronx. So it's going to be a more condensed summer program. And then, you know, basically we're looking at where is it that MindLeaps has its like most connections in the United States, Philadelphia being one of the prime examples. This is where Rebecca, you founded your dance company, Rebecca Davis Dance Company, and for social justice, and basically that's the company that became MindLeaps. Yeah. So we've been talking a lot with partners in the Philadelphia region as well. And it's so easy to go back and forth between New York and Philly, so the teams that we build here can really reinforce each other. And again, the goal would be to train up from the communities that are being served by the organizations with whom MindLeaps is partnering, and not necessarily to have professional dancers always be the full-time team. Right now, we are so lucky that Caitlin and Sadia and Kevin, yourself, but those folks are at the top of their craft, and they're taking their time to come and be with our program, and they're so committed to it. And so at the same time, that's partly why our approach it's been difficult to really diversify the staff. Luckily, many male identifying dancers of color are employed gainfully in the dance world. This is wonderful. But for us, we're going to try to find a way to bring in movement educators, physical education educators, people who want to learn the MindLeaps curriculum. And of course, it does include dance. But those folks can be trained up wherever we end up running the program.
Yeah, no, I totally think one of the biggest learnings we've had is that the people who live in that community are the people who can guide the program going forward. And the MindLeaps method is like, it's a tool, it's a pedagogy, it's a curriculum, all of these things that you've said, but it can be taught to people. It can be taught to teachers just as it's taught to students. The essential piece of it is the representation. Jesse, so okay, well, we'll be looking out for Philadelphia and revisiting our friends Margaret and Howard when that happens.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Now, if you kind of think about, gosh, like if you watch the news today, we were even talking about this in one of our trainer meetings last week. The kind of the fear around gun violence here in the United States. It feels like every time you turn on the news, you're going to uncover another mass shooting. There's like this kind of like level of violence is, again, not new, but is being more seen and felt right now across the entire country. The issue of mass incarceration is what we're addressing with Children of Promise. I mean, there's always been the question of gender and identity. If you kind of think about the global context, the national context, what do you think are like the takeaways? Like, what are the key learnings about, a methodology like MindLeaps or another about like, where do these social emotional learning tools fit into like a world that is sometimes in crisis?
Yeah, and I guess I would talk mostly from the perspective of arts for social emotional learning. Given my background and the work with MindLeaps, I think that open communication is one of the key things that needs to happen between partners who have a program that they want to do together. Taking the time to really understand one another is crucial. And I would say that also, if it's an arts organization, that of course art is not the goal necessarily. It's part of the process, that the social emotional learning is about a process. Yeah. And art is a tool for that. I do think that, for example, on the issue of like gun violence, for example, like, we need to pass laws like that. That is clear. Right. However, of course, the idea that programs like MindLeaps could reach young people before they are able to become conditioned and what's the word I'm looking for? Made more extreme on the internet, and things that are a lot of the young people who are doing mass shootings, for example. If programs like social emotional learning programs were able to be reaching those children, it's possible that could be prevented, of course.
Yeah, I mean,
and then
I think this, what you say about kind of art is a tool and social emotional learning is a process. And, if we kind of loop back to how we started the conversation today and that conversation with you and me sitting at the park, this idea of social emotional learning, not just being for like kids who are out of school, or not just being in like a traumatized community, or not just being for somebody who just fled this moment in their life of violence. It's actually something that I think increasingly we're understanding that everyone needs at any ages all around the world. And it's not something you just get and you hold on to. It's something that you work on all the time. And I think that, yeah, exactly as you say, the more that becomes like a process everywhere, but also adapted to the communities where it's potentially needed the most, the soonest, can really potentially change outcomes, we hope, in the future. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say that one of the things that I've learned a bit along the way now is that even as our wider community through social media and through our own awareness becomes more active and more aware of social justice issues, it can become even more, it can become difficult and more tense, and even for people whose lives are most impacted by the negative actions of others. And so if awareness is being raised, say, about Black Lives Matter, for example, it doesn't necessarily just mean that, like the young people who are in the programs at these organizations that we're working with, that they are not going to be struggling with social emotional learning issues and mental health challenges. As society becomes much more vocal about these issues, it can become also more vocal in our heads and difficult in our heads. And so, these are things that we have to deal with even more energy. Yeah. So as you become more of an activist, you need to put in more time. It's not like you just put in a little time and then all of a sudden it gets better. I hope that point was clear.
Yeah.
But
no, I think this idea that it's a journey, it's a process, it's a path, is coming up more and more, not only in the world of MindLeaps, but as we look at how systemic some of these issues are and how complicated the solutions and the approaches are, but yet so needed. Jesse, you and I could speak forever about the last just 6 months alone, working in this program in New York City and what we've learned from it and what we're continuing to learn. We're so grateful to have you on board as our USA Program Director, and look forward to having another conversation about the updates on this program and where we're going from here soon. Jesse, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm sorry I'm sweating a bit. It's hot up here in Harlem.
Okay, well, go cool off. And to all of our friends, thank you so much for joining.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca.